Hello, Matrix. Welcome to the second recording of this. Not that you heard the first one, but at least you've seen the pictures. I recognized that after my Zoom meeting yesterday with the staff members that somehow I'd managed to cancel, like mute my microphone completely. So we're back. All right. So let's have a look at periods of fetal development. So now we're going to look at what develops when and when things can go wrong. We're not going to deal with what goes wrong in this lesson. We'll deal with what goes wrong in the next lesson. I am also not going to make my own personal video about it. I feel like there are people who can do a much better job speaking about fetal alcohol syndrome, effect of drugs on birth, and what was the third one? Oh, like spina bifida. So what I'm going to do is I will go and find some really short, nice videos, and they're not necessarily to study. It's part of your AIM 3, so it's just that you are aware of it. But I feel like it actually rocked up in last year's final exam, so we do need to go over this kind of stuff, just with reduced weight and of babies and so on and so forth. Anyway, let's talk. So over here you can see a developing little fetus over there. It's on its way to becoming a baby, and this is just indicating a couple of things that does happen while development does take place. So the first and most important thing is that the central nervous system develops from week 3 till full term, and that is why we don't allow abortions after about the first month or first trimester. Well, not the first trimester, just the first month. This is because the baby has developed enough nerves to start feeling pain, and that's the idea of why we actually don't allow abortions, and that is because of the actual central nervous system. The individual itself that's developing, or the organism that is developing, can actually feel the pain, and that's why we stop. Obviously, there's a whole bunch of ways that you can hopefully stop it beforehand if you do not want to fall pregnant, but we'll talk about those and contraceptives after the next lesson. All right, so let's have a look at the ears and eyes. Note that they are both about 4.5 weeks to full term, and that is because they are extremely difficult to develop in terms of the amount of the different types of tissues, the specialization, differentiation, as well as the nerves. Remember that both ears and the eyes offer very sensitive senses, if I can put it that way. So in the ears, I know we didn't do it last year, it is part of your syllabus, we didn't have time. The ears have structures inside of them that are able to actually recognize where you are in space, as well as like your sense of balance, whereas your eyes can see things and they help you see harm if harm is on its way, as also to figure out if something is harmful. Okay, so you can figure out both of those. Now the heart is really important. This is probably one of the fastest developing of all the structures, and by developing I just mean like creating a structure that has 4 chambers with blood vessels that are able to move nutrients around. And that is from 3.5 weeks to 9 weeks, where it becomes pretty much fully developed, and then it just needs to grow. The reason why we need our heart to develop so quickly is, remember I said to you last year in grade 11 when we did why certain individuals need blood systems, and that is because the organism itself becomes too big to rely on diffusion to get its nutrients around the body. So we need a a circulatory system to be able to move the nutrients around quick enough so the baby can develop in a fast enough pace, and that is allowing it to develop stuff like the palate. Okay, so the palate is going to be from about 6.75 weeks to 16 weeks. This is super important, and this is the bit that splits your mouth from your nose. Okay, so the olfactory from the buccal. Okay, remember your mouth is your buccal, your anything from your nose backwards is your olfactory. And we need to be able to split that so that there's no connection between the two of them besides the back of your mouth by your pharynx. And this is going to stop because you have a whole bunch of nerves that actually hang into the olfactory system, which is going to allow you to smell, as well as recognize if there's any foreign proteins in your system, which is going to stop, going to make you start creating mucus so that you're going to not get infected with whatever is going on. All right. Also, there are some people, or there are some babies and people that they don't develop a palate, and that is called cleft palate. And those people actually can get a operation as they are born, or maybe maybe a year into when they're born, and it actually literally tries to split your whole left and right top jaw from each other, and that causes big speech impediments. You often will see them with a huge scar over their lip, And that is because they've had to cut this entire chunk away so that they can actually get to the palate and start putting them back together. Then we have our upper and lower limbs, which are from about 4.5 weeks to 9 weeks, and this is because we need differentiation to allocate to the body where we need to grow bone, where we need to grow skin, where we need to put more nerves, where we need to put more blood vessels, connective tissue, cartilage, all those other bits and pieces. So the development, or the them developing itself, needs to be quite quickly. Then we have the external genitalia, and that is from week 7 all the way through full term. It is important that it continues for that long, just so that it's able to recognize what is going on. Okay, so this is more so just to point out what can go wrong and when, because you can imagine that every single one of those things I just mentioned, a lot of stuff can go very wrong very quickly, and this is just the warning period. So the red component of this entire thing shows when it is a risk at most being the risk of most damage being done or most abnormalities happening. At the bottom there, it's called the major congenital anomalies. All right, so this is when things can really go wrong. And you can see that the nervous system has one of the biggest red areas out of the whole, out of all the things that develop. And this is because there's a lot of stuff that can go wrong because you need that long for a brain to fully develop. And even though, like I'm saying, okay, cool, well, it takes time for it to develop, it's showing that it's just showing that things can completely go wrong as things are when you are being born. Then we have our heart, which can be damaged from about 3 weeks all the way to about mid 6 weeks, and then things sort of come right. Upper limbs are most at risk between week 4 and 5 and, I don't know, 7, 8. Then we have the upper limbs and lower limbs, almost exactly the same, developing at the same amount of time as well. Also note that the entire bar tells you how long it develops, when it starts developing and when it is developed. Remember, but when I mean developed as well, I'm not saying like it is fully functional. I'm just saying that it has all the tissues necessary so the body can build on it as well. Then we have the teeth, which are developing in a much later state. They start around the time of the palate, but the palate needs to grow properly and develop fully before the teeth can actually be 100% put in place. Then we have the external genitalia. There's not too much time where it can go wrong, but from about 7 weeks, and that's when you can tell the gender of your baby. Sorry, the sex of your baby, not the gender. They get to choose that later on in life. And then we have the ear and the eyes, which are also very much the same amount of time, except eyes take a bit longer. So we have the ear, which is developing from about just after 3 weeks, as let's say from the 4th week all the way through to about the 16th week. So please also note that development takes from week 1 all the way to week 38. Okay, so that is the gestation. Oh goodness, the gestation period of a human being is approximately 38 to 40 weeks. Okay, so I was mentioning to you that the central nervous system is one of the most important because it actually allows for communication between the entire body. So this is what it actually looks like, and you can see from 3 weeks, the yellow component is the brain developing. That looks more like a ganglion. Remember when we did cephalization in grade 11, I mentioned that a group of nerves that start acting like a brain-like structure is known as a ganglion. So that ganglion is starting to form, and this is indicating to the body what needs to be put where and how it can be communicated. And remember, communication is still occurring from the mom. So even though the baby isn't necessarily creating its own nerve impulses, even though they are nerves, it's being stimulated by the mom, and this is important. You'll notice that it grows and grows, and from about 11 weeks to 6 months, you just have this blob of nerves themselves. And these nerves are not specialized in any way, shape, or form. They don't have those crevices, which you'll see from 8 months to a newborn, and those crevices that you see in the brain are actually called sutures. Those sutures develop as the child experiences new environments or new situations, and each one of those indicates that a new thing has been learned. There has also been major studies to find that if the brain does not create the sutures, a person cannot survive. But obviously that's a lie, because there's always one person who, upon death, when they did the autopsy, found that his brain was completely smooth. All right, and it's important, if you want to go have a look at it, I recommend you go and Google. All right, so let's have a look at some pictures of developing babies. As you can see, Johan is over there. Wave love. um, he's hiding out here for a bit. So we have an 8-week embryo. This is what it looks like. You can see that the extra embryonic membranes are quite developed. You can see the chorion on the outside. You can see the chorionic villi on the far left-hand side over there, or bottom left. That is allowing the placenta to form, or allowing for the initial implantation. Then we have the the umbilical cord, which is quite well developed over there, and eventually that will become extremely thick. Then we have 12-week fetus over there. You can see that the eyes aren't open yet, but the eyelids have actually developed. They don't want to, or they don't open their eyes because there's no need for them to have any external stimuli from the inside of the womb, because they'll just be able to pretty much see red. If you've ever put a light underneath like a thin piece of skin, you'll notice that it's red. And also they don't want any dangerous chemicals to affect the eyes, especially because they take so long to develop. So they're not going to open until development has completely taken full course. What you'll also notice is that there's this fine white layer over the developing 12-week fetus, and that is a type of friction reduction substance that forms over the whole child, and that will continue on top of the child until after birth. So it almost acts as a lubricant during birth itself. All right, then this is what a 10-week fetus feet should look like. And this is what a 16-week fetus. You'll notice that it's pretty much exactly the same, but the head has grown. You can see the ears have developed a bit more. The upper and lower limbs are quite well developed, and the umbilical cord is a little bit thicker. This is a 16-week-old fetus, just in case you wanted to know what they actually look like during development. Unfortunately, this fetus didn't survive, but you can see that the mouth is still very much closed, the nose holes are starting to open, and the eyes are completely shut. There's a high sense of development in terms of upper and lower limbs. You can see that the entire abdomen is quite well developed. The intestines are there, and the genitals are starting to develop as well. So this is probably the most important part. That first part, remember, they will never ask you to tell, the exam will never ever say to you what happens in every single week, so do not learn it like that. If you wish, this is in your textbook. It is on page 110, what happens at every single week. That is for your own reading if you want, but it's not completely necessary. But let's have a look at the 3 stages. So here is a child that has been through a Caesarea, or that is, someone is taking it out of the mother's uterus via a Caesarean, otherwise known as a slash and grab. You'll notice that the baby doesn't necessarily have a lot of color in it, and that is because there isn't a lot of oxygen in their system just yet. They need to start breathing by themselves, so they'll be able to suck out all of the amniotic fluid out of their lungs, and once that happens, and then they hold them upside down generally to get that liquid out, or just suck it in, they'll be able to then breathe by themselves. Now, just an interesting topic while we're on here as well is that a lot of the times, and even till modern times, often we say that women should try and have natural birth, and that is because the muscle contractions on the baby while the baby is being pushed out through the vaginal canal is important in realigning the spine of the developing, or the baby that's being birthed. And also there are certain bacteria and other funguses and other microorganisms that are released onto the skin of the developing child, which will help the immune system of the child kick into action so that they'll be a healthier individual later. But to a large extent, if a baby is being born Caesarean, it's either by the mother's choice or because it is in extreme measures. That means that maybe the woman's uterus, her pelvis isn't wide enough to allow the baby's head through, or the umbilical cord is wrapped around the baby's neck. In this instance, you can see the umbilical cord around the baby's, I would assume, right arm, if we're looking at it correctly, and it's extremely thick. So this mother will then have the baby out. Once the baby has been extracted, they will then hand the baby to the mom once it is clean, and then they will take out the placenta. Whereas in natural birth, directly as the baby comes out, they often put the baby in the mom's arms, and then they clamp the umbilical cord afterwards. There's also some science at the moment which I think is a bit crackpot, but interesting to maybe note, that a lot of people are saying when a child is birthed, the placenta, which is connected to the umbilical cord to the baby, should be left on even though the child has been removed out of the uterus for X amount. I think it's about like an extra 30 or 40 seconds, which will allow any remaining nutrients to be pushed into the baby, which allows it to develop into a healthier individual. I don't know if 30 seconds is going to help, after all those months being in the womb, but I suppose everybody has their own say around this. All right, let's look at the hormones that are involved. The two specific ones are oxytocin and prolactin. So first and foremost, we have oxytocin, which is produced by the hypothalamus. Remember, that's in the center of your brain. It causes the contraction of the uterus and the release of milk. Okay, so in other words, oxytocin works hand in hand with prolactin, and those two together are able to convince the mammary glands inside of the breast that they should start producing milk. All right, so what I've also included over here is the positive feedback system of the contractions of the uterus. So at number 1, we have the head of the fetus pushing against the cervix. Then number 2, we have the nerve impulses from the cervix transmitted to the brain. Then we have the brain stimulates a pituitary gland to secrete oxytocin. Oxytocin carried in the bloodstream to the uterus. Oxytocin stimulates uterine contractions and pushes the fetus towards the cervix. And then the head pushes even more on the cervix. And the whole thing goes around and around. And I recommend that you do really learn this positive feedback system. It's one of the few that you kind of need to know. All right, so let's look at prolactin. And there's some scary stuff in here. So it stimulates the mammary glands to produce milk. And please learn the word mammary glands. Some babies secrete a milky substance from their own nipples due to the fetus being affected by the prolactin of the mom. So this is an interesting part to note that you are going to, when you are developing in your mother's womb, or a child is developing in your womb, that they're going to be experiencing exactly the same amount of hormones that you are while you are living your daily life for those 38 to 40 weeks. So that means if you get a fright and your adrenaline spikes, that means that your baby's adrenaline will spike. If you take drugs that affect your hormones, it will also affect the child, so on and so forth. But in this instance, a baby's going to lactate because the body's going to want to produce milk, which is quite gross. Anyway, so progesterone during pregnancy inhibits the secretion of prolactin. So in other words, you want, once the birthing has happened, remember you want your progesterone to decrease quite rapidly because you don't need to have the uterine laying anymore. So the progesterone should decrease, which allows for the increase in prolactin. So that's another negative feedback system that you could bring in there. Then we have stage 1 of birth. This is the beginning of labor and the dilation of the cervix. So you can notice there that we have the initial phase and the active phase, and we have the effaced cervix. You'll notice that that very thick muscular layer of the cervix has now completely flattened, and this is because the muscles are actually being pulled apart, as well as the baby pushing down from the top. So please also note that birth is not about the uterus pushing from the sides, it's about squeezing from the top, and as it starts squeezing, sort of like peristalsis in the alimentary canal, or your small and large intestine, it slowly starts to squeeze from the top, okay? So it starts contracting from the top, forcing the entire baby out at the bottom, just in case you wanted to feel a bit weird. Now, near the end of pregnancy, oxytocin is released from the hypothalamus. So what starts the initial contractions? The oxytocin, which is released from the hypothalamus, and this causes muscles of the uterus to contract. This is called labor. Okay, nice definition over there. Contractions become stronger, and eventually extra embryonic membranes break, and the amniotic fluid passes out of the vagina, and this is when your water breaks. How exciting. Imagine how gross it must feel, like you're just walking around and all of a sudden, like you've just wet yourself. Oh, it must be so interesting. Anyway, the cervix starts dilating. It needs to be open about 10 centimeters for the baby's head to fit out. Sometimes more, sometimes less, but on average about 10 centimeters. Like, I want you to go find a ruler and think of how a cervix, which is barely like 2 centimeters wide, ends up, or maybe like 3 centimeters wide, ends up at about 10 centimeters wide. Like, it's crazy. So this is the longest stage of birthing process, as it can take up to 16 hours. If it occurs for more than about, I think it's like, some women are okay going up to about 24 to 36 hours, but anything more than that, the baby is potentially not getting enough oxygen. because the amniotic fluid has not been moved out of the lungs, and the baby could start suffocating, and this can cause long-lasting damage to the brain. So if it is taking too long, then we need to have an emergency C-section. So stage 1 in short: the uterus contracts, the head pushes against the cervix, the membranes break, and the cervix dilates. Stage 2, this is where the passage of the baby through the birth canal into the world. And please note that this is maybe one of the quickest parts of it, but maybe one of the slightly more aggressive. Please also note where this particular child's placenta is. It can be on the side, it can be at the back. It really just depends on the developing child and where implantation actually occurred. And you can see that his head is quite clearly out of the vaginal canal, and then the shoulders need to come through. A lot of the times, once the head has popped out, they like to grab the base of the baby's neck, turn it sideways, and then pull it out with a nice big plop. So contractions of the uterus force baby through the birth canal or the vagina. Mother is actively involved in pushing the baby out. Again, please remember it's not pushing over the sides, it's pushing from the top, and then it's being forced out. Once the baby is out, the umbilical cord is cut, and this lasts for about 2 hours. So the baby, in short, the baby is forced out through the birth canal, umbilical cord cut, and the baby handed to the mother. It's really important for the baby to be handed to the mother as well, so that there can be a release of oxytocin. A lot of the times, some women maybe don't necessarily feel like they're connected to their child, and the one way of doing it is putting a naked baby on bare skin, and that causes the body to release oxytocin. Often you've seen men walk around after a child has been birthed with a baby without his shirt on, and that is to kind of create a connection between the two individuals with a release of oxytocin between the two of them. We have stage 3, which is delivering of the placenta, because giving birth once wasn't enough. The placenta becomes loose and is pushed through the vagina. Takes place within 15 minutes of birth of baby, and the placenta is often called afterbirth. Remember that lovely picture I showed in the previous set of slides? So the placenta becomes loose and the placenta is pushed out as afterbirth. And finally, this is just a quick little summary of everything that happens. So stage 1, you can see that it's initiating or putting its head and starting to flatten the cervix. Number 2, the head comes out, and number 3, the placenta needs to be moved out. All right, so I hope this was okay, and now you can finally hear me and see me. All right, Matrix, have a good day.